So I'm going to do a brief introduction and enable us to move right in because we want to give Professor Scanlon here as much time as we can. Okay, so this is Professor Rory Scanlon. He completed his bachelor's in theater through Idaho State University and Brigham Young University. Received his MFA from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in 1984. A faculty member for over 28 years at BYU, his research and teaching continues with an emphasis in costumes for Mesopotamia and Mesoamerica. He is the author of Costume Design Graphics published through Quite Specific Media in New York. In terms of his past service here on campus, he's the past director of the Division of Design and Production, Associate Dean for the College of Fine Arts and Communications, Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education, and Director of the Honors Program here at BYU. He currently teaches full-time in Design and Technology for the Department of Theater and Media Arts, and is head of the Design and Technology area. Okay, Professor Scanlon, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you. So I'm supposed to come talk to you guys about one of my favorite topics, and that's manipulating an audience. Today I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of the language of design, so how things speak to you visually. You know how we communicate audibly. I'm going to talk to you about how we speak visually, and you're going to realize how much you've been manipulated most of your life by things visually. Okay? Cool. We all like that, right? We all want to be manipulated. But more than that, we want to learn how to manipulate someone else. So that's what we teach people when they're doing scenic and costume and lighting design, which is what I work in. We're going to talk about perceptives, elements, and principles today. And I'm going to kind of soar through this rather quickly so we can have some questions. So if you can at least get the theories down, you'll see some of the applications. I have some images to give to you. So perceptives. First of all, the image has to get into our head. And so there's ways that we do that. We use scanning and focal point and warehousing to do that. Here's scanning, which is basically a process of just visually looking at something. Pick it up, okay? So read this. One of the simplest forms of scanning is reading. And you're trained very well how to do that. Each of those little characters up there mean absolutely nothing unless you've been trained in using those little characters up there, because you've looked at other languages and it means absolutely nothing to you. But all of that gives information and puts it in your head, doesn't it? Okay. So here's an image. Now, I just asked you to scan that, and you do it automatically. I'm not sure how many of you were aware of how you actually did it. How many of you looked across that? How many of you looked that direction? Caught that scan, okay? Anybody go around here? Nope. Pick that one up? Okay. We're probably not conscious, and we do it a lot faster than reading. When I give you an image, you do it very quickly, and you collect lots of information. Most of us tend to still scan left to right, even with a visual image, because you're trained to do that in the reading process. So you still, because of the world you grew up in, tend to go left to right. So a lot of people who are painting, for people who look left to right, build their paintings that direction to get the information into it. They have something that usually pulls you in up here and carries you across over the right-hand side. This one does very beautifully. Okay. Here are some examples of scanning. This is the first opening image from the movie called Contact. How many of you have ever seen Contact? In the opening segment, they start on Earth, and what do? They pan out and go clear out into the far ends of the universe. And audially, we're hearing bits and pieces of what they've been shooting into space to speak to aliens. And we go all through the history of man, which is a scanning process, isn't it? So visually and audially, we're taught to scan in the very beginning of a movie called Contact. Okay, focal point. So somewhere in that scanning process, you may be stopped. Something will catch your focus, and you'll be picked up in that image somewhere. So we're back over here. I want you to look at that and think about where you're being stopped, where you're looking. Anybody looking over there? Okay, it must be lunchtime. Okay. Anybody looking over there? Anybody look at that image up there? Okay. How about over here? And how about right there? You may not be aware of what caught your eye in those areas. We're going to talk about some of that visual language, what the artist did to create focal points for you. And usually those focal points add up to a meaning in the visual content. We'll talk about that. Is there any question where the focal point might be in this painting? Everything points there, how value-wise it's the lightest part. There's lots of things of the elements and principles we're going to talk about that hold focus and give you focal point here, correct? Any questions on that? Anybody have any questions about the focus point? Probably not. In a movie called Passage to India, the cinematography uses lots of passages, lots of different arches, and through these arches we see different things. And so I'd encourage you maybe to see, have you maybe seen Passages to India?
Are you asking if anybody's ever
Yeah.
seen? I have.
Okay, good. Great film, uses lots of focal point to try to give you a message. What's really important often in focal point is what's around the rest of the images. So when we're in the courtroom scene for this, we're seeing lots of the principal characters, but what's even more important, around them, we're seeing the culture of India dressed in the garments of England. Standing there representing guards and representing judges and representing, and which is the whole message of what the movie's about, is the point of objects within a space, you might say, focal points within a scan. Okay? Whoops. Warehousing. So once you've got it into your head, you've scanned across. Interestingly enough, we make most visual instruments, like televisions, work just like our eyes. It scans across and puts thousands of little dots, doesn't it? It works the same way. We tend to build things visually the same way we perceive our own world. In the warehousing process now, you have to suddenly take the image and the things you've gotten and file them in your head somewhere. And you go, oh, that looks like I'm going to file it under, and you're not consciously doing that, but this image right here. Give me some adjectives.
Kids.
Kids.
Sweatshop.
Where are you going to categorize this?
Sweatshop.
Okay, sweatshop. Does that change it at all if I use sweatshop? Does that change your warehouse? It does, doesn't it? You come to an image with your own warehouse, and you might file it in another place than someone else would because of the background you have. So, I'm going to ask you some questions. Where are we? Is this Provo, Utah? No, you're all going, no, you don't think it's Provo, Utah. Is it Utah? Is it the United States?
No.
No. It's where?
France, revolutionary France.
Okay. France? Europe somewhere?
Yeah.
Would you all agree with that? It's probably in Europe somewhere? It's not the Orient? Okay. When are we?
Back
Is
in
it
the
contemporary?
day. Look at those pants back in the day.
Okay. Most of you, unless it's Halloween, don't wear these kind of clothes, right? Okay. So you recognize that, and maybe some pieces, because of your warehouse, you might associate and say,
Right, like revolutionary France.
okay, there you go. So you might say revolutionary France. Okay, and why are we? Why would an artist spend a lot of time painting this picture? What's happening in this picture? Some of you might know. Anybody know this painting?
I've seen it before, but I don't remember what it was
Okay,
about.
good. Glad you know. If you do know the name of it or you know what it's about, don't say anything for just a moment. So let's figure out through our warehouse, combined warehouse in this room, and then I'm going to feed your warehouse some more information. Let's decide how we would file this away. Anybody have an idea why these people are gathered here? Food? That's all a guy needs to know. There's food in the room. I'm going to gather, right? Thanksgiving. Yes, sir.
Queen or somebody in the background there.
There's someone important. Do you see a focal point device being used for a character there? Okay, something's happening that's important. Okay. The other thing that might help you is if you looked at the title of it. It's called The Peasant Wedding. Ooh, suddenly it changes. Okay. So who's probably sitting over there? The bride. Now find the groom, please. And you won't unless you have some warehouse information. And you know most of this because it's in the scriptures too. Most of the grooms were in charge of feeding the guests, which is probably why Christ was asked to create wine. Oops, does that say something about who may have been the groom in that story? Okay. So can you now find the groom? He's kind of hard to find over here. He's one of the finely dressed gentlemen who's serving the guests. And that is not pie over there. Those are drinks. They drink in plates. That's alcohol and probably milk for those that didn't drink. For the Mormons in the room. There was milk. Does the picture change now? Do you file it differently? And you have a totally different understanding once you've got the warehouse to go with it. Make sense?
Wait, is that a bagpipe or what is it? I thought that was a gun though.
That's bagpipe. So someone's playing music. There is music being involved also. One of the most famous warehousing techniques, because advertising always uses warehousing. If he likes milk and I like him, then I should like milk. Okay? So warehousing is used all the time to tell you where to file lots of images so you'll buy a product. Used constantly. In the film, anybody recognize this film at all? Blade Runner. They create the future. But the success of making the future is to take images of the past and mix them in. Do you recognize New York? But do you recognize that it's future now? There's elements of it that you don't recognize, but there are elements you do. You know what a movie house looks like. There's certain element, there's a street light, but that's not the light you're used to. So they've associated warehouse images that you already know, but they've updated them and moved them into the future. So they've used warehousing to bring you into another world. Okay, let's go quickly through the elements. These are the ingredients, and the principles will be the recipes, how they'll combine them. So let's just talk about some of the pieces or the techniques or the tools that are used by visual designers. Line. There are 3 principal lines, and you have names for them because they're so important to you. Where would you go in your world to find vertical lines? New York City,
Yeah,
probably,
New York
right?
City is what I think of.
Or how about Redwood Forest?
Yeah.
Okay, those are all vertical areas. That says man versus God. Those environments, we think of man in placement to something more superior. So those also work in courtrooms and in jails. And those kind of environments, we use lots of vertical line. Whenever you're in a cathedral, makes sense? So God with a big G or a little g. Here it's man versus authority. Okay, where would you go for horizontal lines? Man versus man. How about a classroom where there's lots of tables and lots of horizontal spaces? Okay, we have discussions in here. We're not usually talking about this. We're talking about this. We're talking about man's theory. Make sense? Okay. Diagonal doesn't really place us. It's either a horizontal moving vertical or vice versa. It adds energy or tension. Where would you go in your world to find a diagonal line? Mountains.
Grades. Grades. Sorry.
Okay. How about playgrounds? Okay. Energy, tension added to those environments. So here's a vertical. Horizontal. Totally different feelings to all those spaces, isn't there? And you're probably not going to hang diagonal lines in a room you want to relax in. I doubt it. This is a great day to live in this game. Line also is formal and informal. Let me give you a definition of formal line. The Greeks were the master of formal line. It's symmetrical. Doesn't mean the same. It means it's mirror imaged. Each side is mirror image of the other. Okay? And it's therefore predictable. If I gave you part of it, you would be able to draw the other side of it. You'd know what it looks like, because it's predictable. It tends to be man-made. We don't find nature tending to create things that are formal. And it's power and control. There's power to that, but something has controlled it to give it that power. Informal line, in opposition, is asymmetrical. It's still balanced, but it's not as predictable. If I gave you half of that object, you couldn't draw it and get it exactly right. You could guess at it. It doesn't fall over. It's asymmetrically balanced, but it's unpredictable. It's natural, and it's power out of control. Now, I don't mean like a 5-year-old in a candy store. I mean, it's got power, but it's in itself. We don't usually see it as being controlled by something else. It has power in itself. Now, interestingly enough, we tend to go from formal worlds to informal worlds, and we call them vacations. But here's the question. Do people who live in informal worlds tend to go to formal worlds for vacation? Maybe so. Maybe the change of line is a release for us of some sort. We get tired of one type and we move to the other. So here's some formal line for you. Here's some informal line. And we relate to them very differently, how we work with them. Great film, Edward Scissorhands, in which we have the opposition of a world where the people all live in these very structured, very colorful, very geometric, very formal lines. And here's a great moment when the Avon lady has run through all the houses, can't find anybody, so she looks in her rearview mirror and sees Edward Scissorhands' informal house on the hillside. And strong opposition of an informal line against all the formal line behind it. Good show to see tonight. Halloween, there's Edward. You can see it in the costume design and in the characterizations, very informal and very formal characters in opposition to each other. All right. That's just line. Form. For form to exist, two things have to exist. Field and motif, which means nothing to you. In other words, a shape and a background. You wouldn't see me if I was standing in front of a vacuum. I wouldn't be here, I'd get sucked into it, probably. But, so, you see that word, not only because the word is there, you see it mainly because there's a background behind it that's setting it off. If I change the background, you can't see it anymore. I promise it's really there. I changed the letters to white because there's no contrast between the two. You cannot see them. And I'll prove it. It's really there. See? I just changed the background and now you can actually see it. So, sometimes we get fooled in form when we cannot make the difference between shape and background. You can ask how many horses would sit here all day and debate over it. Okay. You'll know back there, just get the cowboy hat on. In a great movie called Contact. It's a wonderful opening segment. It's a whole story about firefighters. And in this world of firefighters, there's this woman. And nice contrast of a female in the middle of a male world. We have the exact same thing happening with E.T. From a very informal world going to a very formal world. Totally alien to him, quite literally, right? And we're concerned about that. Many stories we see are based on the contrast between lines and forms. Okay, value. If you took the color out of your television set, you'd be looking at values. The highest value is white, the lowest is black, and there's lots of grays in between. And interestingly enough, we take that word to talk about values in our life, things that are important, things that are not important. We also apply these to characterizations. Heroes are white, villains are, unless you watch Star Wars. Luke Walker is in black, 3/4 of the movie. And stormtroopers are white. Do you think the movie's questioning your values? Absolutely. Of course it is. We'll come back and talk about how it works with that by some of the other elements. Ansel Adams, who had color available to him, chose to shoot in black and white so he could work with values. I think a lot of you have seen a lot of Ansel Adams images. Great film called Adam's Family Values. Strong contrast in characterization when we bring this high-value character into a world of low-value characters. And the strong contrast that happens between those two worlds. My favorite line in the entire movie is when the family all comes to visit her in her house. And because Festus has now moved in with them. And she says, Debbie, you've done this to me. All that I can forgive. But Debbie, pastels. Great value sentence. Okay, texture. Texture is something that most audiences aren't as aware of, but is probably one of the most effective ways of communicating or changing how we see objects. So we might see an angel in this character. We might influence that by color to some degree, but texture will definitely give character away. And we'll know that we're really not watching an angel, we're watching something from the 1970s probably. Okay. We get the idea. I'm going to show you two different paintings by two different artists at the exact same location, and what changes is the texture. So get a feel for this one. Here's the exact same location. And the balance of detail, which is texture, is different. Here we're focused on the people, here we're focused on the environment. You can hear water in this one, you can hear conversations in this one. Make sense? The difference is the texture. Okay. Texture, Jurassic Park. Wonderful segment in which we place these very textured characters in a very untextured environment. And they can't even grab a hold of the floor, they're sliding all over the place. There's some reflections of people, and right? They think it's him because they see him reflected in this shimmering. And then there's a great segment later on in which the dinosaur is getting very close to them, and they project the texture of computer code across this dinosaur, which is wonderful. Contrast and texture. Okay, color. Color is probably the most noticed by an audience. And the three controllable qualities of color are hue, value, and saturation. So here are three colors. This is the blue hue, that's the red hue, and that's the yellow hue. If I change hue, I've just changed color, obviously, right? You know your primary colors. I'm guessing you probably know your secondary colors. You probably know some of your tertiary colors, and you know that colors go on and on. What you might not know is what's in the center of a color wheel, And I'll answer that by telling you a color wheel actually comes from a color sphere. You've cut open the orange and you're simply looking at the equator. That's what you've been looking at most of your lives for a color wheel. You don't understand there are millions of other colors floating around them. Okay? If we put the top of it back on, we'll get the North Pole of white and the South Pole of black. And if I blended those two together, you know exactly what's in the center now, don't you? It's gray. So you blend it together, you would, and you can actually mix white into those other colors, and the addition of white is tinting, and the addition of black to color is shade. Most of you use that word incorrectly. You see your roommate, I see Charles sitting here with a nice blue shirt. I say, I love that shade of blue, and he would say, excuse me, this is a tint. Okay. Thanks for correcting me, Charles. So you know, the answer is gray is in the middle of it. And you can also get to gray by adding two complementary colors. Colors that are opposite on the color wheel are complements. P-L-E, please don't say nice day. You look really nice today. Complement, opposite on the color wheel. They will tone each other down. That's our second controllable quality of color, right? So, here we have a painting. One of the reasons that the red works so well is because we have so much of its complement in the painting as well. There's lots of green to punch that hot red. It makes that red even hotter. If you place complements next to each other, they will make each other appear brighter. If you physically mix them, they will tone each other down. Make sense? Here's a great example of color being used. We have Woody, who is of the earth. And in fact, the bottom half of the room is Woody's room. And everything is in earth tones and brown tones. But the top of the room going up is all in Buzz's colors, because he's of the sky. You guys didn't even notice that, did you? Okay? Very famous movie, very good idea, use of color in characters. What they're doing. Okay, those are the elements. If we mix some of those, we'll use the principles. Let's talk about balance. If I put this image up here and had a lecture today, you probably wouldn't hear most of what I'm saying, because I would be dominated by imbalance. Create an imbalance visually. In fact, most of you would be sitting like this by the end of the class. And I would point out this is just a bunch of lines and values on a board, but it will drive you crazy, literally. So let me help you out. Are you okay? No. Are we getting better? Okay, we're a little better. Let's just get rid of it. Okay. Now we're going to get back into the word symmetry again, because some pieces are perfectly balanced, aren't they? They're mirror imaged. There's perfect balance being achieved for you in that picture. This picture is also balanced. If I cut it in half, it's balanced by using some of the elements. Now you have the words, so tell me what's balancing this. What elements are helping balance this painting?
Standing people versus sitting people.
Okay, good. So there's oppositions there.
Those are lighter on the left and a little darker on the right.
See value differences? Okay, good. Anything else?
There's a little spot with the lights where there's a little bit of a lighter spot, or with the glasses and
Okay.
little bits of brightness or whatever that are kind of offset.
Okay, over there. And is there brightness over here? There's glass there too. Look where it is. It's up there. Okay. How about gender? Interesting, isn't it? And movement. I hear music on this side. I don't on that side. Make sense?
Wait, how's that balance affect different?
By giving different weights.
Symmetry.
And heavy weight and lack of, which we call negative space over here, balances it out. Okay? I don't think you feel like the painting's going to go like this. It balances itself asymmetrically. Charles?
So, how much of this, when people design a piece of art, how much of this is explicitly designed, or how much of it is really their intuition about
Good.
what's balanced?
You exactly explain what I say to my students. Don't think about it. Design instinctively, and when it doesn't work, then analyze it using the tools to figure out what you did wrong. It's like asking, we could sit in an English class and cut apart E.E. Cummings all we want to and say he meant this and this and this and this, and he walk in the room, he'd probably go, really? Oh, I guess I didn't. He wrote instinctively. He trained himself, right? Got the tools first, and then that just happened instinctively. You have been trained to put clothes on, instinctively you do it every morning. But you're probably making choices, maybe based on what's clean that day, right? But you're probably making choices such as, if it's a test day, most of you will down dress, so no one will talk to you. And you know how to do it. You don't give a lot of detail to yourself. You're very simply dressed, very straight, very usually plain colors, so people don't approach you and don't talk to you, because all of them will fall out of your ears if they start talking to you, won't it? All that stuff you stuffed in your heads. And then the days you really want to communicate with people, then you're putting on patterns and bright colors, and you want people to approach you and talk to you. So you know how to do all these things. You've just been trained to do it because you've just watched other people do it, like your parents.
So with artists or designers of media, you provide this framework for them to know how to analyze pictures, have them look at lots and lots and lots and lots of pictures,
Right.
analyze them, and then is the idea that they will start to
Assimilate.
internalize or
Yeah.
implicitly be able to
Hopefully.
use
It's kind of not only being a parent, isn't it? And hoping you're teaching the right values to your
Right.
kids and they'll make the right decisions when they're in the right time. Yep, exactly. But this is all about visual communication we're talking about. A great film, Sleepless in Seattle, that talks a lot about balance in two different lives of two different people with an entire United States in between them. Right? Most of you seen Sleepless in Seattle? Okay. And in fact, we even add a map, don't we, when they're changing places, and we even go over across the balance. We go to the two different coasts and have a conversation about the balance between these two people. And rhythm. We know about rhythm, right? So I'm going to give you a rhythm. Everybody happy with that rhythm? Anybody not happy with that rhythm? Would you like one more element? There you go. Yeah, you're happy with this. If you really look at that, it's not balanced. There are too many of one kind on there. But it feels good to you because it's bookended. Now, how many like that rhythm? How many think they're perfectly fine with that rhythm? Here's our Wagnerians in the audience, okay? This is Wagner's music. And here's Beethoven's music.
Now, Rory, that's balanced.
That's symmetry.
Oh, okay.
Has symmetry,
I was probably thinking symmetry.
right?
Okay.
Okay. This one's balanced in pairs, too. Make sense? There's an even number of each one of the pieces on there. But it's not, it's asymmetrically laid out, though, isn't it? Okay. And there's one space over there that tells you blah, blah. Okay. Now, into that I can do an accented repetition. Accent or make one piece a little bit different, and it will pull focus. It becomes focal point very quickly. It doesn't matter where I place it. It will become focal point. So sometimes we'll use repetition of a rhythm to make you see an element, which gets us back into scanning, gets us into, right? You can see how all this is employed in all the other elements and relationships. So it's rather hard to talk about one element or one principle in one image because multiple ones are being used. But it's fun to talk about them. I'm not saying that in one movie that's all they used was balance. They were using lots of the other elements and principles. But one they were using particularly a lot. Make sense? So, find rhythms in this painting for me.
The legs, the
Okay,
support legs
expansions
of
of
the
the bridge.
People.
The people themselves.
The fields or the whatever is growing.
Okay, all that grass or what it is, and there's even some of it up here in front, isn't there? Okay, there's some rhythm to that.
A mountain or hill.
Good. We call those the fields. Look at the far mountain and the closer mountain and then the bridge itself. Okay, there's an arch being repeated several times, right? Okay, lots of rhythms. Will carry you around. Affects your scanning to some degree, doesn't it? Are these people, which way are they walking? Everybody believes they're going that way? Towards the city? Okay. You can't really quite tell. I mean, with the hats and things, they could be going either direction, really, if you think about it. But most of the rhythm carries you that direction, doesn't it? Okay. Is there a focal point to this picture? Here you go. Point it out.
Little girl, kids.
Little kids in the middle. Why? You know the elements and principles now. Why are they the focal point?
Lines draw you in.
I could have probably put them in any one, didn't they be a focal point? The lines.
The light.
So you have a pattern with the lines that she interrupts being the only other very white thing in the picture.
Okay.
And everyone's seated facing the way and the kids are turned full frontal.
Okay.
So I guess the light is two different lines.
It's the contrast, I think.
Okay, there's contrast about higher value, right? Somebody else figured it out?
Texture. This face
Texture,
is-
some there's more detail. Okay, the other ones are kind of faded out, so
So
there's
there's
more.
like two in the middle.
And there's two. Okay. So there's lots of different elements and principles being employed here to create focal point for you.
I've heard about the golden mean.
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, that's part of why I would initially say I'm gonna see that, because that's right in the golden mean spot, right?
Part of it. Great film called Strictly Ballroom that not only tells stories of ballrooms, but uses the rhythms of the dances in the lines and in the characters. And in this one segment in here, it's the tango. So another great film to watch is to watch Strictly Ballroom and see this one confrontation between two characters that is a tango, quite literally. And they even dance tango in part of the scene. Fun movie because it uses the rhythms of dance in all the scenes, even if they're not dancing. Okay, space, the final frontier. So, when we start placing objects and moving things around and putting all these things together, we're going to get into space, relationship of the environment to all these pieces. Okay, I've got an object in a space, and I'm going to move it. So close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes. Okay, you can open them. I just moved it. Close your eyes, I'm going to move it again. Open your eyes. Close your eyes. Open your eyes. Oops. Okay, we already talked a little bit about left to right. Your natural inclination is to move things left to right in space. Center is really not the strength. It's a good focal point, but it's not the best place to stand. Sir?
Have they tried that in cultures where people read from right to left?
You wouldn't have to. I could tell you what would happen. It would have a different effect.
They go the other way.
Which is why you watch Oriental movies and you're very fascinated by them, but you don't understand them because they're happening the other direction. So when you watch Akira Kurosawa movies, watch them in a mirror and they'll make more sense.
Look like playing backwards. I mean,
No, I don't think that. But if you look at some Oriental art, we're going to show you a piece up here in a minute. We'll flip it for you and show the difference in how it feels. We call this space here. Well, in fact, I'm going to back up. I want you to look at the space and ignore the object. Try your best. Try to ignore the object. Anybody successfully gotten rid of it? Pretty hard to do. Now try it. The space has a lot more power than the object does. We call this the point of most inherent motion. You physically add motion to it. It is not moving by any means. You want to move it. And if I put it over there, it's in least inherent motion. It's finished. It's completed its trip. Okay? That could be important when I'm watching a film and whoever's over here and whoever's over here. Now I've been watching the presidential debate. Who have they been putting over here? And who have they been putting over here?
Romney on the left.
They've been putting Romney over here. And some of my students went back and did research, and 90% of the time the person on the left was the one that won. They gave them the most inherent motion by filming it that way. In fact, one of the presidential debates a couple years ago, they actually placed a camera in the middle and kept turning back and forth, not to give inherent motion to either candidate. And they've been moving around quite a bit, haven't they, in the debates? So, but why most talk shows place the guest over here? Gives them inherent motion. Make sense?
If we were in the Eastern Coast, would it be the top right corner?
Could be, absolutely. So, here we have a setup for a scene. We have a guard that's guarding the king and queen who've been thrown in prison. Can they get out? Inherent motion gives the power to that character right there. He has no lines in this scene, and if he just reaches up and rubs his nose, he'll steal the scene. Now let's turn it around. Can they get out now? Yes, because that's a down staircase and that's an up staircase. Okay. If we use this staircase for Miss America and she came in, here she is, Miss America. Works every time. Beautiful. There isn't anybody that can come down a flight of stairs like that and look graceful. You're waiting for them to fall flat because it's backwards. It doesn't work. So here is the famous painting we talked about. And here's a crashing wave and two ships coming in. Are you worried about ships at all? you're gonna make it through the wave. That wave has a lot of power, but because of its placement. If we flipped it, there'd be a little different meaning to what's going on. We change the power and gives inherent motion to a different copy as it moves on. In E.T., you cannot fly on a bicycle unless you go left or right. Believe me. If you went the other direction, you would crash and burn. Okay, you have to fly left or right. And he does, doesn't he? Yep, and it works if you do that. We believe that. Yeah, you can fly on a bike if you go left or right. Go home and try that. Okay, so those are perceptives, elements, principles, ways that visual artists are communicating to you, knowing how you perceive things, knowing how you might therefore relate to them, and how you might ask questions about them. So, let's finish our discussion of Star Wars, because the answer is very simple. It's in the other elements. Stormtroopers are white, but they're also shiny, artificial. You don't hug shiny things to take to bed with you. You take Ewoks to bed, right? And if you take an Ewok, the original design for Ewoks looked a lot like Chewbacca. It wasn't working. When they took the imagery or the warehouse of teddy bears, I don't know about you, but if anybody hurts a teddy bear, they deserve to die. Right? So that segment worked beautifully because they were hurting teddy bears. And so you're going to just mash them into the ground, right? No second thought. Make sense? Okay? And Luke Skywalker might be black, but he was in texture black. And you were more interested in finding out if his inside was going to become his outside as a character. Set you up. To make you want to watch and watch his evolution as a character. Sir?
Well, I think one of the things he was playing at the time was with Oriental values and association with that. So in that culture, white is death, for example. So the very clinical white stormtroopers are an image of death, which makes a lot of sense with some of the Oriental philosophy and aesthetics he was leaning on.
However, the first three movies didn't have a lot of Oriental influence. It was the last three that had lots.
Some more visual. I mean, I know who's interested. I don't know how much the visual was impacted, but I know when he described the Force that was inspired by Asian philosophy.
And then you can compare that to Spain, where marriage is black, right? Yes. So any other questions or comments? Does this help to explain some movies that maybe have puzzled you?
I don't know if you need like easy ways to remember all these. Like, if you
You don't need to
probably
memorize.
like,
You already know all of them.
well, I mean, so like you can kind of run through them in your mind, like mentally.
So I would just get the list of the perceptives and the elements and the principles, and take one a day and watch for it around you. Go watch Line. Walk outside, see the Kimball Tower. Hear the legend. President Kimball was asked, may we make a building after you? He said, just don't make it short. Whether that's a true story, I don't know, Steve, is that a true story?
It's a great story.
It's a great one. Does it sound like President Kimball? Just don't make it short.
Yeah.
And different parts of our campus are more vertical than others, aren't they? So it's fun to take some of these in context and watch the world around you and see how they're used. Next time you pull up to a stop sign, try to make yourself look right instead of left. You won't. You'll automatically go, okay, that way, okay, that way, gotta go. Because you're trained to scan that direction. So next time you pull the stop sign, go right and then left, and you'll feel how wrong it just feels. But you'll want to go back and look at the right again. That's your last look, isn't it? Even if it's a one-way street, you gotta look that direction. Because that's the final direction.
Is that the same for instructors? Do you tend to attend more to the left side of the class?
I don't know, Charles, you're sitting over there. Possibly, could be. Sure.
But you can train yourself to not do these things.
You've been trained to do what you're doing now, so you could be untrained, right?
Yeah.
That we as teachers have to believe students can be untrained, right? Well, that's the concept.
We've talked about the effects of doing some of this, but I think cognitively, there's so many possibilities for training yourself to do the opposite. I think it would just restructure the way you think and see and what you perceive, because naturally we have these filters on. We've been trained to see certain things certain ways.
Exactly. Right.
And if we shift our filters, we may begin to see new things we've never seen before, think thoughts we've never thought before, go in a whole new direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely right.
Fascinating.
So is that part of what you mean by your title when you're talking about manipulating audiences? Like, the manipulation is you're trying to get them to think about something, like Woody and, what's that guy name?
Woody and Buzz.
Yeah. What's the manipulation? Let's just take an example. Earth tones in the bottom, skyish, blue, whitish looking on top.
And you all noticed that instantly, didn't you?
So how was I manipulated there? Just to walk me through one. Just do like anatomy of one of these
So
examples.
we established Woody as the ground person, didn't we? And he's the foundation of the entire movie. You really think about him. Buzz can be fun, it can be light. He's white, he's a virginal white because he's so innocent, right? When you think about the context of just the way they're designed, it all works beautifully.
So it creates certain kinds of feelings in me or certain expectations about.
Well, it tied right into your warehouse very quickly. It knew what you think and how you interpret things and used those to its advantage.
Try to make clear the theme, the plot. I mean, I'm trying to, what's the objective in all this? I'm trying to.
Well, the objective is for the visual artist to get to communicate to the audience as quickly as possible.
Right, try to
So when we
create
make
effect.
decisions in a play or in a movie, we don't have a week to explain what we're trying to do. We have to do it in a fraction. So we're going to use images you understand.
So these
very
are all
quickly.
resources to try to create this narrative, this effect, this or whatever it is you're trying to do.
Yep, exactly. And play off what you already know as much as we can. Trust.
So, does this relate to the concept of cultural competence? Different cultures have different warehouses.
Oh, absolutely.
So to say, so.
Yeah. So we take our American movie and drop it in China or Japan or Twilla, you know. And we'll get another connotation from it. And there are films of, for example, I know for a fact that when Jaws was shown in my mission field, Tahiti, they were cheering on the sharks. People were stupid. Get him, get him! They were cheering on the sharks. Because they live in an environment of sharks and fish. And they very much respect the fish around them. And they thought it was a comedy. It was just a silly movie. They laughed about it. That was great.
Wow.
Yes, sir.
Can you give us an example from advertisements like Toyota or Nike, or how they manipulate us through these same?
We'd want to go back to anything specific, but I've seen some companies that have magazine ads are some of my favorite because they're static, right? That's just frozen and that image is just there. A picture of a car and it's wrapped in candy wrapper. You can still see it, but it's got a candy wrapper around it. You can talk about taking a warehouse image of, this is sweet, this is cool, this is something I like. It doesn't matter what it costs, it's still tasty.
It feels like that might be true in terms of marketing emblems too. I'm thinking of the Nike swoosh and the
Yeah.
Adidas
For
angle.
movement.
The angle was movement with
Yes.
Adidas and
Yep.
how they
It's
market
diagonal.
in terms of line.
Yes.
So you mentioned how Asian orthography has something to do with the visual manipulation.
Uh-huh.
So I know that for Japanese language, they still read right to left, but for modernized Chinese Mandarin, they actually read
And
left to right.
those cultures are changing, aren't they?
Right, so how does that,
That's a really, you can find to do studies in those cultures that really work both directions and see, they would probably get different meanings maybe by representation of which culture it's coming from. Does that make sense? If it's older, they might have a different connotation about it, different expectation.
So can we say that even though we may all be perceiving different things at different times, that underlying it all, there's this common set of human meaning, that there's some fundamental warehouse of meaning that we all share that may be implicit or tacit? I mean, is that fair to say?
Well, we would hope so, but I'm afraid we're living in a world where it's becoming even more diverse. As I'm watching a presidential campaign, I can't believe how diametrically opposite some people could be.
Yeah.
And how it's important to make the other person totally, equivocally evil. Instead of just saying, I vary a little bit on that topic. But instead they go, that guy is evil, and everything he does is wrong. Going, come on, we're educated people. That's Darth Vader, and this is Luke Skywalker. Come on, I don't believe that.
Yeah.
There's things I agree with both candidates. My hardest choice is how it's going to work when I throw them in the mix of the rest of the politicians, right? Throw them in the pool. That's gonna be the tricky part.
So is it getting more difficult for visual artists to tie in or dig into those warehouses?
Well, they have to do a lot more research of who their audience is going to be.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so a lot more research of who am I actually building this for. I destroy students' minds entirely by saying I really didn't like Hunger Games, the movie. First of all, I didn't read the book, had no interest in reading the book. Saw a movie, but it wasn't for me. It wasn't my movie. So I wasn't the target audience, so I'm not surprised that I didn't like it. They were targeting a totally different group of people. And perception of evil and good and what's right and what's wrong for this generation is entirely different than mine. And I watched and I kind of go, you don't think that's bad that she feels that way about adults? I mean, I didn't like that, but the other younger generations thought that was normal. Yeah, adults are stupid, dumb, because television tells them that every day. Most of the shows they're watching, adults are stupid. Children are manipulated all the way through.
If we take that to extreme though, doesn't that create an almost impossible situation for any visual artist to then say, here's my audience, these two
Universal.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very difficult to do. Very difficult to come up with something that's going to work worldwide.
But
You might
that's
have to
the
go-
goal, right?
You might have to dig down to what's the closest human instinct that all of us might. Preservation.
Fascinating.
So as we look at pieces, we might think about who the audience was. If I'm sitting in the doctor's office and I'm looking through a woman's magazine, I'm probably not going to be very interested. It's probably not marketed towards me and it's not going to capture my eye. But I'll do it sometime and look at the colors that are being used in the ads, look at the left and rights, look at a lot of the things we talked about. It's catering to women. Then walk into Home Depot and see that everything is boxed in male colors. Girls, isn't it a boring place to go? Home Depot? Doesn't it just make you want to buy things? Yeah, it's really ugly. It's all in woody tones. It's all earth tone, isn't it? Because that's what guys like.
I hate to go to Joann's fabric store.
Yes, there you go. Yep. So those people are marketing the right audience. They know how to package it and how to place it so it's right for the people that are the audience. How that's going to work. Grocery stores are laid out to make you buy all the stuff in between the three most common things you buy: eggs, milk, and bread. Are those three things next to each other? Would it make most sense to put those three right next to each other? That's the most common things people go to a store to get. And they're placed in the most difficult place in the store to get. Because they want you to walk past all the sales to do it.
That's equal.
And they make you go to 3 different parts of the store to do it, don't they? It takes a long time to go get those 3 ingredients because they're not placed next to each other.
Very right in the front and middle.
Yes, right there. And all those things are right there in the aisle when you're in it, right? Don't you love all that? The stuff they really want to sell you, that's right there next to the cash register.
Yeah.
Okay. Sir?
We probably have to go on. So one thing I've noticed, like when I design, is like something doesn't look quite right. You don't really know why, but like you want to try something new. Like how do you go about doing that? Like
That's
using
tricky.
new elements of design.
Well,
like,
first of all, I think just the idea to say I want to do it because I want to make it new and different isn't probably catalyst for anything.
no, like it's not working.
Right. Because what I have to really get down to is what am I really trying to do? And if I'm trying to really relate to this kind of audience, then why am I trying to reinvent the wheel? It doesn't make sense. Let's use some of the tried and true techniques. So, which is why when there's a big famous movie, you know there's going to be 10 more just like it, right? Because people are going to go, oh, that worked. Let me try that. That's not the best approach. Say, well, obviously that works, so let's go do it. Marketing and making money is your only objective. Making art, you might want to be different. You might want to try something new. Mostly what artists are trying to do is new combinations. Well, line does work that way, but what if I try to make a line do this? And so you'll see them finding new ways by trying to make some of the elements or principles work in opposite directions. And I would say if we look through time, some of them have changed. They have evolved. Because we have.
So I'll look at your outfit here. You have this lined shirt, very formal, kind of, and then you have this tie, which obviously is October 31st, with all this informal, like, shapes on it, and this
Yeah,
angled
it's a
something
J.
like
Garcia
that.
tie.
So tell us, did you consciously wake up this morning and try to come up with some kind of contrast to create an effect here?
No, it was Halloween, I knew which tire I was gonna wear.
Background shit, right?
Yes, oh yes, I've gotta make sure I get the right feel though, right?
You had to put the
I
background.
gotta go
in.
neutral.
So maybe we should break to go down and get some, any final comments or questions? Okay, let's give Professor Scanlon a round.